Hello, everybody, and welcome back to SSI Meetup. Today, we are joined by Daniel from Block. He's going to talk to us about the Web5 project that they've been working on, specifically bringing a decentralized app and protocol layer to the web. Daniel, it's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
So for folks that don't know you, who are you and how did you get to this crazy word of decentralized identity?
Yeah, so Daniel Buchner, I work, like you said, head of decentralized identity at Block. We're working obviously on this audacious thing that's labeled Web5, which you'll learn about here in a second. But really, it's the culmination of a lot of work from a lot of different groups and individuals that are sort of, that I've been paying attention to and working with on their projects for the last 10 years, starting back at Mozilla, where I sort of acquired this interest in not just identity, but personal data ownership, all of those things being sort of recentered around the individual. And it's taken quite a while to get to a point where we have the goods, but I think that we can kind of put it all in the same box now and have like this competent stack to build things with.
Yeah, super cool. Well, we're really excited to learn more about it. For people who are tuning in for the first time, a quick reminder about what we do here at SSI Meetup. Alex and I are privileged to be able to bring on people who are building and working in the decentralized and self-sovereign identity space, with the goal to share this knowledge to empower others to go and be successful in this growing industry. So to that end, we welcome anybody who has a project they want to talk about, a topic to unpack for us, things like that, to come on and share that. And likewise, we encourage people to take what they learned today, including the slides that are going to be uploaded to the website, and use them in their own work and to share them with their coworkers and with their communities, because everything is licensed under a Creative Commons license. So that's very much the ethos of what we're here about, and I think very congruent with what Daniel's going to be sharing with us. So with that said, I will stop my screen share and hand over to you in just a moment, Daniel, and you can take us through. There we go. You should have permission to do that now.
All right. Okay, great. Let me just start this up.
Fantastic.
Great. So yeah, we saw the title slide here, but let's first things first, right? So to understand, I think this thing Web5 or this next evolution of the web, I think we have to back up and take a look at where the web came from and some of the initiatives that got us to where we are. So a little bit of history. HTML5, I don't know if folks remember it. It was a while ago now. It feels like not so long ago to me, but 16 years ago. Browser vendors kind of came together and they published this memo, really at the time, that later became this HTML5 spec. And it was a spec that encompassed all sorts of new features that the browser vendors wanted to bring to the web. And the reason they did it, Flash was contending to sort of be the next interaction layer, for apps. And the iPhone was out and people were talking about, well, what's the role of the web, in a world where it's all going to be about apps. And at that point, the web was really a document oriented sort of informational tool, and it wasn't quite vibrant yet. And so browser vendors came together and they put all these features, wishes that they had in this box called HTML5 that extends way beyond HTML. I mean, if you're familiar with HTML, it's a markup language. It's sort of how you have elements appear on a page, but it's limited in terms of its scope. Whereas the APIs that are encompassed under HTML5, like geolocation, audio APIs, small amounts of local data storage, have nothing really to do with HTML, right? It was just this banner that everyone kind of circled the wagons around and said, hey, look, if we're going to do this, we need to call it something. And it's going to have a bunch of different features across a spectrum, of areas. And we're all going to put it in this box. So HTML5 was born. It did make websites a lot richer in terms of the experience they could offer people. But it was really, it afforded the website owners a great degree of power over providing these really vibrant experiences. But it wasn't like restoring ownership to users. It just sort of gave them a better experience from centralized websites. And in those 16 years since, I think we've seen centralization become a serious problem with the web. And I think there's a lot that encompasses the word web, whether it's identity or data ownership or tracking, and all the things that we see that are issues today that have manifest. And I think our put is that we need a new effort to make the web, what it was always supposed to be. And that new effort is something that, we really believe in. And I think that what it looks like is a change from the web of today, where really your sort of content donors, you're giving your identity, your data, like everything resides with a custodian or is owned completely by a centralized entity. And really it's you and them, and you're kind of the user, right? And I think that paradigm needs to change. We need a web where you own your identity, you own your data, apps wrap around you, and all of these things are value-added services to you, not necessarily silos that capture parts of you. I think that's a huge distinction. So we just need some technology that'll do this. And I think what we need is another initiative that's just like HTML5. It needs to be an initiative that gets buy-in across the spectrum if it's going to work. It's got to encompass the right technologies. And we think, that's why we called it Web5. We think that it's an evolutionary leap for the web. And it really is these three major technology areas. One is identity, so DIDs. DIDs are just identifiers you own versus, say, an email address. Verifiable credentials, so the ability to attest within a common format to statements you might make about another person or they make about you. And a web app model based more on storing data with you instead of a corporate silo, right? Like you're very used to that today. You type in documents, it goes to some company that owns your documents. You put your playlists in a music app. You're never really getting that out. It's just the music app's property almost at that point. So I think we need to transform the model, and that's really what Web5 is about. So what's in the box in essence of like Web5? To drill into those three pillars a little bit. DIDs, I mentioned it earlier. Right now, all the identifiers you use typically are centralized. Email addresses, domain names, even very centralized. People are getting these things essentially Thanos snapped from them left and right now. I mean, this wasn't really a big phenomenon 16 years ago when HTML5 was there, but I think we're seeing the culture sort of like, morph into this bipolar thing politically, at least in the United States and other places. And I think the issue there is like, it's creeping its way into like our communications and how we talk to each other, and even the digital realm. And I don't think that's healthy. I think everyone deserves their own digital identity. I think it's theirs to own and control. I think you should have the ability, obviously, to disassociate with people. But we're in this weird place right now where accounts and your digital identity is wholly owned by mostly corporations, and that's weird, right? It's like, just because someone decides to disassociate with you doesn't mean you should lose your digital identity. In fact, it's a lot worse when it moves from being like cat pictures on Facebook that you lose versus the world we're moving to, where more and more is based on your digital identity. If that gets erased, you could be in some serious peril. And so that's why users need to own and control their IDs, which are DIDs. We don't want any reliance on trusted authorities. DIDs are such that you own them. If you have the keys that back them, you can prove that you own them. And it acts as a routing framework for finding your content if a DID is capable of that, depending on the method. And we think that this is a much better way to formulate identity, based on an identifier you control as the root. And I should say, another thing about it is that you shouldn't just have one, right? So a lot of people get scared with DIDs. They think, oh, it's one ID to rule them all. But we believe anyway at Block that you should have many IDs. And I, even our wallet that we're working on, the desktop wallet, kind of starts out life, and you'll see a little picture of it later, with 3 IDs, right? One for career, one for personal, one for social. And you might use those in different contexts, and you might associate different data with them, with degrees of personalization, and who you present one ID to may be very different depending on the context. So that's just an example of DIDs and from the world of today to DIDs. The next pillar is verifiable credentials. So Verifiable credentials, it sounds kind of formal. It sounds a little, I don't know, stodgy, I suppose. But really all it is a data format for signing proofs of something, or assertions of something, I should say. So anyone can sign a verifiable credential. I could sign one to the hosts here and say, they're very gracious hosts. What a great podcast, they put on. And that's a verifiable credential. I'm saying something about someone else. Do you believe it? It's up to you, right? Like, no one's forcing you to believe any particular thing. In this example, Alice, she's working with an issuer who happens to be an educational institution. And she's probably got a degree, maybe she finished school. And instead of a paper diploma, which is pretty worthless, I've never been able to just walk in with a paper diploma and say, I should get the job. See here, this paper says. They print them out. I remember in kiosks in the 90s would print out the fake ones from Harvard in the mall. So how much is paper worth, right? In this case, the educational institution is able to digitally sign using their DID, a proof that says, hey, we are this institution, and we confer upon Alice this degree. And then she can present that credential that represents her educational attainment to anyone else, right? And they can say, well, as long as I trust that issuer, as long as I trust that school for saying, who has what degrees, I'll trust Alice and that she has this. So, you can kind of formulate these in anything you want. This is kind of where we get the web of trust and reputation. Everything's really just a verifiable credential. It's being stated from one party to one or more parties. Next component, which I think is really the most vibrant component in terms of interaction, is decentralized web nodes. And that's our name for essentially a personal data store that acts as the foundation for where all your app data could live. Right now, it lives in a variety of silos per app, right? And it's very hard to get out. GDPR and other laws are making that a little bit easier, but it's still very, hodgepodge, and you really can't count on it. With apps based on personal data stores, specifically DWeb nodes, you're able to actually use apps that store that data with you, right? Like if you're taking notes down, or a document, or playlists, that data is actually being stored with a sort of app database that's yours. And apps are really being granted access to it. So if someone says, I want to be your note-taking app, right? It doesn't mean that you then have to store all your notes on their server. They just gain access to your personal data store and can render whatever experience based on the data that's there and maybe write into it. And that goes for any type of app. It's essentially a model where they become more of a view layer in most cases than the actual custodian of the data, which I think is the right way to reorient the web, because that puts power and control of users. So this particular data store, we call them DWeb nodes, has all these features. I just named a few. There's a few on the slide here. Supports any app type, so they're not just about social networking, or they're not tailored for any one particular app type. They're generally capable of many different types of apps. Replicated, so you have an instance that lives on your devices locally. You can have an outbound remote instance. Encrypted, so you can choose to encrypt information or not. You might want to publish some publicly and have it plain text readable to everyone. And supports large binary. I just put this on there, binary meaning large files, because a lot of different data stores don't do that, or different protocols really just stick at the message level and don't get involved with being sort of a file store. So that's
Daniel, just a question on the data stores. Is it already clear? But if I would want to use this today, what data stores would you recommend to use?
So yeah, we have a reference implementation of this that I'll talk about later. I have a slide on
got
this.
you.
Yeah, we can go into that a little bit. Do you have any other questions about any of the other pillars? Some of them obviously you in the audience are probably well familiar with the first two.
Yeah, no, it's great to see the progress, but yeah, no, that's good. I just remember you talking. We've been talking about this for many years, I think, right, about the data stores, and was just wondering, looking forward to see the next slides then. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's all a reality now. So to give people an overview of the topology that we think is the correct topology for this sort of next evolution of the web, we think that people will have these personal data stores again on their local devices, and then they'll have outbound remotes. It is not a leader or trusted system where, like, if you chose to have your remote DWeb node hosted by, say, a large web corporation, that it's in control. It's really a replica. It's a masterless system, so it's no more powerful, in fact less powerful than the ones that live on your devices. And the outbound remotes don't have any keys, so they don't sign on your behalf. They can't decrypt your encrypted data. They mostly act as just a node that's up, right, that has uptime. because you're not always, online if you're, on a flight or, any reason, maybe you just have bad internet connectivity, and the world moves on while you're not connected to the internet. So if someone wants to send you a message or update a document that you shared with them, there has to be something that's readily available. You can try for really, really elaborate peer-to-peer protocols that are able to, kind of talk to your device, but sometimes you're just not on the internet. So those things are a little bit fraught. I think we're a ways away from those being really able to make your phone or a local device for battery reasons and your primary server. So you're going to need outbound remotes. And what happens here in this topology is if Alice knows Bob's DID and is using a DID method like ION or others that are fully capable of the full range of things that DID is described in the decentralized identifier spec, specifically routing, the ability to look up a DID and find where the endpoints are that you should be talking to, then you can send a message to Bob, right? If you're Alice, you can craft up one, sign it with your keys and send it over and to those endpoints that you were routed to. And that message will find its way to Bob, and Bob can send a message back, and it could be files, right? It could be updating files. When I say messages, just any sort of data operation. So
and do those people do those other entities, like does Bob have to be an individual, or is there a concept
no,
where
good, that's really good to point out. Yeah, so the entire system is just set up as identities, right? This could be two companies talking to each other. Alice could be Nike, and Bob could be Walmart, for instance, and maybe Nike wants to expose publicly their shoe catalog that Walmart can download because they're partners, and that's something where they can push out those sorts of data objects to their DWN, and then Walmart can pull them, right? It's like, if you kind of think about it, it gives you the ability to also crawl all these different types of identities for public data that they expose, and you can make like a Sears catalog, for instance, right? You go find all the IDs of retailers and see what they're offering, and then you have this master catalog that you can see of everything on sale. So that's just an example.
And then for those front ends, is there a concept of like a DApp store or something where people can go and discover?
Working on all that. We actually, I'll talk a little bit about that in a slide that actually features.
Keep skipping ahead because it's so exciting.
Just one more. Maybe it's ahead too, but just the DID resolver. I don't know if we will get into that, but it would be interesting to know how that works. And also, the little boxes below, is that a chain? If it's a chain, is it what type of chain would it be, or is it agnostic?
Yeah. So right now, we've built an extensible framework. So like our SDKs could be updated with other DID methods, but right now we're supporting Key, DidWeb, and ION, and PKH as the primary four. Just to start, the ones that we're typically using ION because it has the routing capabilities, but there's no reason you couldn't add others that maybe don't have a blockchain. I mean, that honestly, that thing is just there to kind of show people that maybe there's this underlying layer, but it's not prescriptive in terms of what does it have to be. No, it's agnostic of that.
Okay, but the nature of the DID resolver, how's the resolver? I mean, who's managing the resolver and controlling it, or how is it trustless in its own nature?
Yeah, so depending on the DID method, it really does depend on the DID method. When we say resolver, you're either running something locally on your devices, or you're relying maybe on your wallet who's running one. Not unlike how browsers will run DNS nodes, but you can always, depending on the DID method, you have different degrees of trust and security that you're given. Whether you're running it all yourself, which is typically in these systems like maximally secure, maximally trustless, or you're doing something else. Like there's another paradigm where maybe it's remote to the wallet agent, and that thing's the thing that's doing your resolutions. It just depends on the setup and the method.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about some use cases, right? How are we actually going to use this stuff? We kind of think we want the web to be more personal, more powerful. So these are a few examples of that. I recently moved, within the last year, and I moved a few years before that too. So I went through it twice in a pretty short time span, where you move and there's all these institutions that you want to know your address and other personal data, businesses that you do business with, people send you packages, things like that. And I find myself when I was moving, it's like it's sort of never ending. Like you just you keep running into people who just don't have your updated information constantly for, I mean, I'm a year in and I'm still running into it. And it's very frustrating because, you know, you have to do that sweep where you update your address everywhere that you can kind of think of at the time. And then certainly everywhere the government makes you do it. And then there's this trickle of like all these businesses where it's like constant form fill. It's like, oh no, that's wrong. And, you know, you're changing all these things. And it's a pain in the butt. And so what we kind of think of is a cool paradigm is if Alice here, she updates her address in her DWeb node for, you know, one of her IDs that's well known to maybe the businesses she does business with and maybe her friends and family. And they're able to get instantaneous push into their systems whenever they sync. And so it's totally asynchronous for Alice. She just pushes once, says, here's my new personal information. Everyone that's subscribed that she's permitted access to now has access to it. So the next time that they call, they don't need to bug her about it. And we think that this is just a small example, right? I guess we're calling it sort of like autocomplete for your life in that sense. I think that's what you get with this and what we can build into the web. And I think it's super powerful, right? It's a real thing that users go through. It's a pain point. No one likes it, and we should solve it. And I think that this technology does that. Next example, you know, I'm on a trip right now. We're, you know, at this Identiverse Identity conference, and you know, you have a few apps in your life that have access to like your hotel reservations, your airline tickets, all this stuff. It's really the, you know, your email vendor, right? And maybe a couple other apps in the industry that have gotten access to this data. And they're the only ones who can really visualize this stuff for you, put it all together. And that's a little frustrating because they don't always do the greatest job with that experience. And this data really is yours, right? So we kind of believe that if companies start coming aboard to start storing that data, or at least copies of it with you in your personal data store, your DWeb nodes, you could pick any app you want that could visualize things like your reservations and your tickets. That way, the travel experience is something that you select in terms of how you visualize it. And that's it's just a better way, right? I should be able to migrate and move my data amongst these apps that give me an experience. And this is just one example of it. And I don't think anyone enjoys the idea that right now, every hotel brand, every airline, they all have their own wallet apps. It's very frustrating. They don't really add a ton of value with those apps. In fact, it's just, you know, I swear, like it must be like a third of the apps on my phone now are some sort of wallet-like thing. And, and I think that's a symptom of the disease.
And 10 years ago, some consultant told them they needed a mobile strategy and they ended up with an app, and great. Now everyone has one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sometimes these apps are not really, they're not really doing much, right? Literally the airline app, it's like, oh, here's your boarding pass. And it may be a couple other things that can completely be done with a different experience. Yeah. So,
but can we? So the question I have about this is, I can obviously it's much better for the user and for the vendor of the travel app that sits atop all this data. Again, like lots of interesting opportunities to upsell, cross sell, blah blah, or just you know, even charge a subscription. Like, you know, you can see all that. It's the incentive for the hotel, the airline, the car rental provider. Like, how do we get them across the line? You know, to do what is obviously in the best interest of their shared customer, but individually doesn't move any of their KPIs. Like, I don't know to what extent you're thinking about that, or you're kind of relying on the app vendors to solve those go-to-market challenges. But that to me feels like one of the bigger hurdles here.
Oh, absolutely. Getting them in the door and saying, hey, like this is good for your users, gonna have a net better experience. That's a sales job. And I think there are, you know, cases to be made around that. You know, user attach from things being awkward or cumbersome is reduced, like people have a much smoother experience that's integrated. Not wanting, your stuff's going to get aggregated anyway. Like that's the harsh reality for, I think, this industry is that they do send you the emails. And so, you know, someone's aggregating, and it's really just like 3 or 4 companies, right? That have
that's a good point. Yeah, choose your aggregator. Would they rather all that sat with those?
Yeah, you could either be aggregated by someone who's kind of a frenemy, maybe, or you could put it in the user's control. And I think they're getting a little bit more fearful. You can kind of see that, right? Like it's like learn my business inside and out. Maybe I should just put the user in control. I don't think they're going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So next example is this, you know, music use case where, you know, you have your playlists, right, that are in sort of, you know, an artist maybe adds stuff to their page, and then Alice is able to pull it down, whether it's new tracks, right? Like artist adds a new track, Alice can pull it down. She can subscribe directly to the artist. By the way, these captions, I had changed the slide since then, so that's why it's a little sparse. It's in progress. But yeah, we were looking at like how to empower artists, even internally. Like, can artists direct publish? Can they have fan subscriptions directly? And this is a way that we can do it, right? Two individuals can sort of subscribe to each other, and that's same thing can happen for the individual themselves. If I update my playlist, on one device, I should have it on other devices, even if those devices are using a different music app. And that's something that we're inclined to make possible. This is an example of sort of the web of today versus I think the web we need. We talked a little bit about the high-level use cases. This is sort of the code examples. Anyone that's familiar with like web coding will kind of see these, but again, like auth for legacy accounts, username, password, something controlled by centralized entity. We think what Web5 offers is a way to shift to connecting by DID. Again, like on the left side, something of today, which is local storage, right? That's just a little bit of data stored locally for each website on that particular device. So it doesn't even sync a website's own data across devices, let alone across other websites. But this is a feature that came in HTML5, and people were very excited about it. 5 megabytes of data, it sticks there. It stays on the page. When you reload, it's back. It was cool for the time, but I think we can do better, right? Why don't you write that data into my debug node? Not only is it going to stick there when you reload the page, it's going to be across all my devices, across all the apps that are subscribed to that data. Just a better experience all the way around. And then lastly, right now I'm getting some data, like maybe photos, and I kind of have to learn my friends, what do they use for photos? They use, iCloud, they use Google Photos or whatever. And how do I get them from them while they share through that particular app? And I hope I have the same app. It's a nightmare. I think that in the end, we need to be querying directly against people's data stores and saying, oh, well, I have an app that understands this protocol and knows that here's my friend Bob's ID. Go get the images that I'm allowed to see and provide me an experience around that. And I think that that's the shift. So this is just kind of juxtaposition between the two. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier. Hey, is this stuff ready? We have the Web5 SDK that's in tech preview right now. So Web5 SDK wraps up some DID utilities. There's some VC utilities landing right now. We actually have it in a separate package, and we're porting it over into this SDK. So you'll be able to do some VC things like verify and sign verifiable credentials, present them, DID stuff like create DIDs, manage them, and then also a local DWeb node that's actually baked into the SDK itself. So this is primarily used on local devices, the SDK, but it actually contains a DWeb node right there, and it works in it's isomorphic, so it works right in a web page. It works in like Electron, anywhere JS will run essentially, at least common runtimes. And we think that's awesome because in one npm installable, you actually have a persistent data store that comes with the SDK. And that SDK is wrapped up with some other things to make it a little bit more robust for the need into a server. That's also in tech preview. And we're running these for free. So if you create DIDs with the SDK, it'll kind of preset our remote DWeb nodes as your remotes. You can change them if you want by doing some DID operations or just at the time you create the DID. But ours are default. We have them up right now. They're very rough tester sort of nodes, so they're not giving you the like 5 nines or anything against them. But it's to let people start building, right? So you can use the Web5 SDK to build an app and persist user data both locally and remotely and sync it across devices. There will be other vendors, much larger than Block even, that will announce they will be running these things shortly. So look for those updated announcements. It's coming to a very consumer set of companies near you.
And Daniel, what's the incentive for a vendor to run one of those? Because they are, they're blind to the data, right? So none of the skeevy Web2 business models work there because they can't monetize the data.
Okay, so yeah, it's a good question, but so one thing to say is they're not blind to all the data. A large portion of what you do online is not encrypted because it's not intended to be, right? Like I would say over half, right? Over half, like your tweets, like what good's a tweet if you encrypt it? I don't know. It's not very useful, right? Same thing about blog posts, like, or just pick your type of app data, right? You even publish like HackMD documents, like, hey, I want this to be public. People come look at it. So I would actually argue like half of data is already intentionally public, and that half of data is pretty valuable to them. And so they could act as the fire hose for that, and they could like do, one example is like doing AI and ML modeling on top of the data. I think it's ethical in the sense that like you're literally saying like, I want this published to the world. So who cares if they read it? I mean, you literally want everyone to read it, right? So that's actually really valuable in the sense that the data that you organically are putting in a personal data store already is like semantically typed. It's organized. It's broken up by protocol and activity area. So for those reasons, it's almost the best sort of AI and ML training set you can imagine, and it's only the data that the user intends for everyone to see. So it's sort of built in. It's the right setup in terms of like respecting the user, right? Because these nodes do not have the encryption keys. So yeah, that stuff that's actually sensitive that you really only want to share with a small group or keep to yourself, yeah, they're not going to see that. But the majority of data that they use for actionable purposes is already intentionally public. So this actually makes it better for you. The second reason you would run them is because you want to be a vendor just like, and this is an interesting thing I learned. You want to be a vendor just like OneDrive or G Drive, right? And one thing about that model that I found interesting when I was working at Microsoft was, I talked to the folks in those divisions of the company, and I learned something that I didn't expect, which was they have this CapEx and OpEx outlay for basically a net amount of storage for all users at a free tier. And they have to give you something free. They give you, I think it's like 5 to 10 gigabytes, I forget the exact number, but they give you this amount. And most people, other than maybe Google, because they have a lot of interaction on that on the app level, most of these services are like sort of dead data. It's like your tax documents or like it's stuff you don't look at very often. It's not very useful to a user in their daily life, and that's how they treat it. They treat it like a shoebox, and that's exactly what these companies do not want. They want to get you to a paid tier. They want to say, okay, well, it's so useful and you're using so much data and you're having such a great experience with our Drive, whatever, insert name here, that you're willing to pay us. And so when you talk about adding a very thin CPU light sort of protocol layer on top, because the DWeb nodes can store against any storage. They have an adapter. It's, they treat like the end data stores almost like a abstract interface. They're more willing to do this because it makes the type of data that the user is storing on their substrate inherently more valuable if it's based on apps and things that you're doing very often. So people are like, oh, wow, I have like 20 apps now, in a future world, a year or 2 years from now, right? People have lots of these apps and they're all storing in your data store. And oh, my data store is getting full and you want me to pay you $1 a month, and that supports 20 high interaction apps that I have on my phone that I actually like. Okay, it's a lot easier of a argument to make at that point versus I by the way, I've had Dropbox, man, they email me like every day. They're like, okay, you're like 10 megabytes away. You better be scared. And I'm like, actually, I have a bunch of crap in there that I don't care about. I haven't touched it for God knows how long, because it's not the type of data I really care about. Like, you can threaten me all you want, but I'm not putting that data with you. So I think that's the crazy, mind screw, is like thinking like, wow, they're actually incentivized to make a useful layer on top of their storage. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, it does, yeah. And presumably a user can have more than one and can fire them easily and stuff like that, right? Because I guess it wasn't clear from that diagram, but I was assuming that you could have more than one remote DWN. Is that true? Or?
Yeah, so the DWNs are set up from the base, even the local, they're not different. So it's the exact same code base for the server SDK, it's just wrapped with the HTTP API. They're made multi-tenant by default. So meaning on your local machine, you have maybe like 10, 15, 20 DIDs, I don't know, some number, and it can store it all in one DWeb node. It's just kind of like rows in its database, or just different DIDs that have different data map to them. Same thing is true for a provider. So it's multi-tenant by default. So you could have a million people's DIDs worth of data in one logical instance.
Yeah. Oh, but sorry, but I was asking a slightly different question, which is that for me as an individual, say, can I easily move from provider A to provider B, or perhaps run two in parallel if I want that redundancy?
In fact, it's built in. So like all you would typically need to do, like what we're gunning for, it's not quite this seamless, but I mean, the tech is there for it. It has sync, right? So it treats your DWeb nodes, they're all the same master list. There's no like one's more important than the other. So when your local device syncs with, like, say your outbound remote that's listed in your DID doc as a service endpoint, it's going to get the exact same state. Now, what we hope to be true here, maybe even by the end of the year, is you go do an update, like just for example, on Ion or any other DID that's capable of having these service endpoints, and you add a service endpoint. So like maybe you have provider A is in there now, and you add provider B to the service endpoints. Those two nodes will recognize that change, and they'll actually just start syncing. So that switching is actually just part of the model. It's just syncing to one that it finds that's part of your set. And it's like, great, I'm done. And you could remove the other one at that point if you wanted to, but there is no such thing as having to do this explicit port. It just happens by the nature of the system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Thanks.
Yeah, cool. So, here's our timeline.
If you're a normal person, I mean, not a developer, I mean, how would you use your stack right now? I mean, how would you access it?
Great. So I have a slide that's coming up that's going to talk about what does it look like for users. Yeah. So here's a little overview of kind of where we started, where we're going, where we want to end up. So a year ago, we started with an announcement, and just in brief, I think there was an idea amongst some people that, hey, Web5's launched right when we sort of did that in June 2022. And reality is we didn't have it ready. We were announcing an initiative that we wanted to start as a true open source initiative where we welcome everyone to kind of have an opinion and build with us from the very beginning, from zero, basically. So some people got it twisted and thought like, oh, you should have your thing fully done. We kind of don't subscribe to the idea that open source is just a publishing medium where, you kind of go off and build it however you want to build it. And then you just give it to people and say, here, you love this thing I made you, and don't ask too many questions, and we're not going to change a lot of it because we spent so much time on it behind closed doors. We wanted to sort of welcome everyone in. That's taken us about a year to get all the platform components done. We have a tech preview that we just announced this month, and we're hoping to be feature complete by the end of summer. So that means all the different features that we talked about that are kind of underway, as well as a public launch of the V1 of Web5 plus, the user agent apps and different apps you can build on the platform, as examples, at least by winter. So just to kind of dive into a little bit of that. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, before we do, Daniel, sorry. Yeah. So, so you're right. That is a more evolved approach to open source than some projects take. But I'm curious, have you been getting feedback from the community as you go along, and have others been contributing, or is it still mostly driven or exclusively driven by Block? But you're hoping the kind of post winter to move into that phase.
Yeah, I think certainly with the credential stuff, we've been active in those groups. We've seen things like SDJot and others, come to the fore. We've been vocal in those areas, and like presentation exchange. The DWN stuff is sufficiently difficult that it takes a while to ramp on the concepts. Even like a masterless personal data store, like just some of the distributed systems problems in there are pretty hairy. A lot of people don't tangle with those often. So it has been a smaller subset, but we do get a lot of outside contributions from the core of about 5 to 6 individuals / organizations that they represent. And that's been great. But yeah, it's been a lot of the lifting on our side on that last component because it's so deep, I suppose.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool, thanks.
Cool. So, to drill in on something Alex asked earlier, which was, well, how do I use this if I'm a normal person? You can see here, we're working on a desktop agent, mobile agent. We call them agents too. I mean, this is a word that's been used because it's like your user agent, right? It's your browser. It's the way that you interact with, like your browser is the way you interact with web pages. This is sort of the way you interact with the Web of Identity and Web5 apps. And so this is actually a screenshot. It's a real one on the left. And there is a decentralized app store component that we actually have mostly working. So people can publish a Web5 app and actually have it show up without any intermediary like the App Store involved, that you can actually pull these, these little cards you see here blurred out, and not exactly those apps, obviously. Those are placeholders, but it does work, and you can install them. You can use them as regular apps. And your desktop agent's role in that is to create and maintain your DIDs, to maintain the authorization and the awareness of which apps have access to what, and be able to sign permissions out for that access. So it's kind of like your home base in terms of your identity and your authorizations and your management of credentials and certain other parts of your data. And so the desktop agent, we're going to have it out as a skeletal release very soon. in June, I believe. And the mobile agent is one that's taking a little longer because that's, mobile app, it has a lot more intricacies in terms of like, the interaction dynamics, and we're more limited on mobile. So that's something that you should look for this winter, fall, winter. And that's going to come out, and you'll be able to use that, both open source. So you can fork our agents on either side and completely change them, or use the code however you want, make your own, just like people fork clone Firefox and Chromium. So
and will it feel like using single page web apps, but both for developers and for users? Is that sort of the current development paradigm for this? Or
yeah, that's sort of the exemplar, I suppose I would say, of how we would see a Web5 app. Is if you're really building one that's like soup to nuts, like Web5, you would be building a PWA, which we call, with these extended APIs, and we call them DWAs, Decentralized Web Apps, versus Progressive Web Apps, which is the current standard for installing web-based applications. And yeah, it's a single page app basically. And instead of then storing your data just to like a random local storage or a centralized website, it's actually storing in your personal data store. And those APIs are there. So yeah, if you built a PWA before, a single page app, it's it's very similar to that.
Cool.
Yeah. And then, yeah, I mean, that's kind of all we had. I mean, we believe that the web needs to move towards this paradigm, and it's happening. I mean, you're seeing it. There's legislation that's kind of urging it this way. There's lots of groups that have ideas about doing it, have other sorts of projects that are geared towards this. I think everyone's realizing that at the end of the rainbow, like, there's this better web and this better paradigm, especially with like the stuff that's happening in society. Like, we need to get there, and I think we will. I hope that this is a project that advances that, but we're learning too. So it's kind of open to build right now, right? Come build these magic internet apps with us. Give us lots of feedback. There's still features to be built, but that's the time we have right now between now and winter, is like really hardening it and getting as many eyes on it as we can.
Awesome. That's a great call to action. And just rewinding almost to the beginning. It's a nice bookend from HTML5 to Web5. You made the point that it was the browser vendors deciding to stop doing their proprietary interactive things and kind of come together and say, all right, this is how we have to do that. Is that as true for Web5? I'm not trying to make it the perfect analogy, but who do you see as those equivalents that are banding together behind this movement? Because you're right, there's a sense of a community. This isn't, Block's not the only company to have thought about doing things this way, right? So who would you consider your allies in this? And is that enough people to make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still at a place. Well, I'd like to see at least all the SSI, DID, VC companies kind of come together. We're not using anything on the DID and VC front that's like in deviation from some of the normal stuff people already support. So that's mostly in line. I would love to see more on the data store portion. I think that I don't think they're opposed to it, but I don't think there's a huge feeling about it, like getting all in one room. I think there's a lot of companies who don't even operate at that level at all. They're kind of just at the envelope and transport level, and that's kind of where they interoperate, which is, I think, not sufficient in my opinion, because you can do envelope transports, and then the question becomes like, well, how do I switch away from your wallet even, or how do I go across devices? Everyone just ends up solving like the data store sync thing in their own way that becomes essentially de facto proprietary. And I think they're waking up to that, though. We're talking to like some, long tenured folks in our neck of the woods in this industry that are waking up to like, yeah, we got to do that. I mean, it's just not real until we do that. So that's happening. But in the pure personal data store space of like, what they call Web3, there are a few, I think data stores that put themselves in that bucket. They're kind of close to what we're doing, but everyone sort of wants to go do their own thing. And yeah, you could say that we did. Yeah, right. You could say we did our own thing, but I mean, we did it out in the open. We did it in diff. Like we chose to do it in a place that was friendly and open, and like anyone can join the calls. And we didn't just go build it off as a company. And I think that is one distinguishing factor from most of the other ones, is we're not just trying to like force our will on something. We really do want feedback. So if I could ask for anything, it would be on the data store component. everyone get really interested, because some people still aren't. And then the people who are building it, like, let's build towards a single target, you know?
Yeah, because it's a good point, isn't it? I mean, even, so there's the Web3 guys, but it's a crowded, there's been the My Data community, there's the Solid Pods, and then on the communication side, you've got Nostr, Blue Sky, Matrix. Like there's a lot of pieces for sure,
Yeah.
and they've all got their merits and they've all got their use cases. This feels like quite an ambitious attempt to bring a lot of that together into what could be considered a holistic, an actual app platform, as opposed to a communications tool or a storage tool or something else. And I guess it'll be cool to see if that's enough to get it like over that activation hump, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's one thing that I find interesting with one of the protocols you said, maybe a couple, is that being designed specifically just to do social or as a broadcast medium is insufficient. And I think that those protocols are finding that out today. Like a lot of those protocols that were like, oh, it's ephemeral and your data's everywhere. People are like, well, is my bio photo ephemeral? I hope not. I mean, I hope that like sticks with all my posts. So they kind of, they started with this narrative, like, we don't need this. And I think that it was people that are maybe new into the space, just new into the problem space, and maybe jump the gun a little bit and find themselves walking their narratives back and sort of re-architecting their systems. And I think the one thing I don't know, not sad, maybe sad's not the word, but like I was a little bummed out to see was like, hey, we could have all started from the foundation where we understood the layering properly, and then we'd all be farther. Right? Instead of what I kind of see happening is a lot of people going and building like the roof to the house, or they're building like one wall, or they're maybe like, hey, we can just have sand for the foundation. It's cool. We'll just put a whole house on sand. And it's that sort of thing where it's like, if you really aren't thinking about this stuff, like almost in like decade time scale and like proper layering, you is a very significant chance that you're going to build something that's like fundamentally insufficient, if that makes sense.
No, it does. But look, I think it leads into a problem that you and I have talked about before, which is that DIDs and VCs, like they've got a marketing problem like that. That's the hotness in a certain corner of the identity industry, and increasingly, like literally this year, maybe the mainstream identity industry. Like I gather it was the talk of EIC and other events, but really it's still in an echo chamber, and it's not like out there in the wider industry being applied to solve problems. And so I do give these folks something of a pass, because they didn't know where to look for some of these primitives, right? Because it's almost been accidentally hoarded by this community.
And I do think one thing about the entire industry that I think we have to, just the DID, that echo chamber industry, is we've got to very quickly circle the wagons around the idea that identity, and I've been preaching this for years, is not about your core vital proofs, right? Or governmental proofs. Like that is a slog. That is sort of not a sexy use case. It's not one that you people use frequently. I'm not going and improving my governmental vital proofs right and left. It is not going to drive enough use cases. I think by saying, look, this is actually an app layer, and credentials are one piece of data on the app layer. Yes, they have a purpose. They're specific and they're special, but they're just one piece of data. And if you view this all as like decentralized IDs and personal data stores that happen to transmit credentials if necessary, but do these vibrant app use cases that anyone can get involved in, it's a much easier sell, right? Like if you were to say, I mean, we're kind of, just like, like interested in things like chat apps and other things that are compelling, that don't need a network effect, that don't take years to start, that, shine and show DIDs and why you would use them. It's just so much better of a narrative than, hey, we're working to like have your government force you to like share your ID more places because we want our technology to be cool and recognized. Like, it's just, I don't
get it. So. Well, a lot of those folks are going to end up accidentally creating the world that they claim to be fighting against, if we make it too easy to prove all that government stuff, right?
Yeah,
so
I agree.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So is there Dan's top three? Like, what if you could have any apps out there, what would they be?
I want to see a chat app. I think that the world doesn't need a Signal, a Telegram, a this or that, and they all are just some proprietary. I mean, effectively proprietary. They don't really interoperate. They're all server bound. If we had something based on personal data stores, which is really like the features are going to be there as of this summer, We can make one that's universal, where you can have your own clients and you can still interoperate. And that's beautiful. I think that that's a big one. I think collaborative document editing, I think we can displace some of this, like HackMD is great. I think it'd be a lot better if that was a collaborative experience based on personal data stores. And we can do that. We're going to be able to do that this summer. And these are useful things that you don't need. And I think this is the biggest focus, that you do not need a network effect for. I can just start a HackMD and I can be like, hey, I'm using it with, with you, right?
Like a good
and that's great.
Single player mode is still good. Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing with chat. Like I don't care if the world's on the chat app. I mean, I'm having a conversation with you and I get some great features out of it. It's good enough, right? So we need to think about things that start at that scale of one person to another, or a single individual, even like my note-taking apps that I don't want, big corporations reading all my grocery lists and like understanding these things are happening in my life because of like, it's literally what I'm putting on my grocery list, right? Like those are apps that are easy to convert and move over because it just takes me, right?
That makes sense. And so, why does this project belong at Block? Or I guess why does it originate at Block? Like, can you speak to, what's the business model alignment there, or the strategic alignment?
Yeah, I think it is in service to some of the things we want, like the TBD stuff that we want to build and are building requires DIDs. I mean, if it's truly a decentralized exchange medium, DIDs, credentials for trust amongst the participants, data storage of your transaction history, all that stuff's required. So we could either have built that in sort of a bespoke one-off way that would only have worked for a TBDEX or decentralized value exchange protocol, and then you have to rebuild it again if you want to do chat, and again if you want to. It just made no sense, right? So we built it generically because I think people at the company believed in the fact that, like, why not? Like, why shouldn't this be a generic app layer? If we're going to put in 80% effort, let's dump the extra 20% and make it work. Now, the other part is Jack. He's funding all these things out there. Like, he's funding the Nosters of the world, Blue Sky. I think he's placing lots of bets. Is my take from both internal and external, awareness. Is he's placing lots of bets. He wants to see these outcomes truly manifest, and he has the ability to do it inside a Block in a special way. And I think that we're able to plug into certain things that make sense for the business, but also advance the technology in a way that is special. So there's a lot of that behind it.
Yeah, well, because it's a big investment otherwise, right? If it was just in service of the TBDEX thing, it would definitely look like premature abstraction gone wild. But yeah, with that 10-year view, as you say, it can start to make sense. So that's pretty cool. Awesome. I mean, gosh, this was great. And what with our technical hitches, I'm conscious I've taken a lot of your morning. So probably we can leave it there unless there's any sort of final closing remarks you'd like to make, Dan.
Yeah. No, I mean, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I mean, like I said, the takeaways, like let's rally around these concepts. Let's get personal data stores up there as like a critical component. Let's believe in identity as beyond just vital proofs, and make it about use cases that are vibrant, that can attract many more developers and companies. And I think that's the way we succeed as a community. It's probably the only way we can succeed in my estimation.
Yeah. No, here. Awesome. Well, listen, thanks again. Really appreciate it. And if folks want to learn more, just tell them where they need to go and how they can reach you or the team.
Great. Hit us up on Twitter. We've got a couple accounts, one for TBD, one for the developer stuff. Join Diff, join the calls, get involved in W3C, CCG and other groups. Come participate. It's not going to get built by just you hoping. So you don't need to be, if you're a developer, great. That definitely helps. If you're not, it still helps to come in and provide use cases and kind of drill in on the tech and make sure that it does what you would need as a business person or product person. So don't just sit on the sideline. Put on your cleats and your jersey and like get on the field. Yeah,
definitely. And I suppose one final point is, do you have any ideas for how the bridges should get built as a community? We alluded to some of the missed opportunities in the past, but going forward, what do you think it'll take to bring the communications protocol guys and the data store guys and the other SSI project guys like all together and rally them behind a standard, hopefully a version of this?
Well, I think it's very competitive right now. That's a very competitive mentality. I don't think there are many out there, unfortunately, that share the idea. Look, okay, well, could we just come together? Am I willing to give on my view of X, you know, to get a little bit of Y. It's like, I think that's a maturity issue for that section of the ecosystem. And I think that will persist for a while. So I think it will actually be a competition between some of these things, even though, and the smartest among us will probably look at each other's projects and try to adapt and pull in what we can. So if my baseline hope isn't that we all lay down our competitive nature and like just say, okay, let's start from zero again, which we probably shouldn't do. At least everyone needs to absorb the best thinking. That's like at least what we need to do. So
yeah, no, sounds good. Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks again. This has been a really insightful presentation, and yeah, I appreciate you spending the time with us today, Daniel. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.